Welcome to Coffee, Culture, and the Capital with Sophia and Greg. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back to Coffee, Culture, and the Capital. Greg, we had an amazing webinar this week that every parent and every teacher needs to tune into, and we're going to dive into that a little bit, give you guys a little highlight about what you're going to be able to learn if you go watch that webinar, as well as there was a hearing on SB 934 on Senator Scott Wiener's bill. And I don't think we need to really explain too much who Scott Wiener is. I feel like most of our listeners, most Californians know who this senator is, as he's pushing some of the most evil bills on the attack of children and parental rights that we're seeing in the state of California, that we actually see across the nation. And we're going to dive into what I think is a crazy hearing that we saw in a Senate committee. And we're going to show you guys clips from that hearing. We're going to dive into what that bill is, why he's pushing it, why it's wrong. But Greg, with that, this is a webinar we've been talking about doing for a while, a webinar that you just put a ton of work into. And I know so many parents and teachers have already been blessed by it, just based off of the updates and conversations we've had with the attorneys that were on it. So what was this webinar, Greg?
Well, we've been trying to launch a movement, a parental rights movement, a teachers movement here in California, just because of what the Supreme Court has done over the last year or so. They've handed down some fabulous Supreme Court decisions that defend parental rights and teacher rights. And those issues have been really big here in California because, what the courts around here have said over the last several years is, if you decide to send your kids to public school, then we have them. And you need to let us teach them pretty much what we want. And, you don't have much of a say. But the Supreme Court, in a recent decision this last year and out of Maryland, Mahmoud versus Taylor, it really said, no, parents have the right to opt out of any curriculum that they believe is seriously undermining their ability to pass along their religious values to their kids. Now, that's a big decision, and it has a huge impact on what parents can do here in California. So this webinar really does explain what opt-out rights first that parents have. It's not just, we always thought, well, we can opt out of sex ed, and that's about it. Not anymore. You can opt out of just about anything. But parents need to start taking these rights seriously and asking the schools respect them. And so we dive into how to make that happen. And the second thing is teachers themselves. Christians who want to have a positive influence on our public education system are being pushed farther and farther to put their faith in a lockbox and be forced to promote and advocate for values that they know contradict their biblical values. And what we're seeing is that, especially recently, that teachers are being told they have to go through what they call LGBTQ competency training, where they more or less are told, you must affirm all things LGBT if a kid says they want to be a different gender, if they come out as gay or lesbian. The only thing you can say is encouragement and go for it. And we're a safe place. So, especially on the gender identity topic, schools more and more are being forced to teach that a kid can be any gender they want. And so, that's a real big problem for Christians who want to stay faithful to the Lord. And so we're just going to give you a little clip here from one of the attorneys that was on the call. Her name is Kate Anderson, and she is in charge of Alliance Defending Freedom's attorney section defending parental rights. And she just, tells a little bit about what she thinks about these rights that the Supreme Court has reaffirmed.
Yeah, so let's check that out.
I just want parents to feel empowered by this conversation. I love what Dean said about that it takes 7 to 8% of parents asking to opt out to change curriculum. And we've seen when parents show up in droves and ask for something to be changed, a lot of school districts will change it. And that has generational impact. And for those school districts that don't, it sets them up for litigation. And some of the best things that parents can do is just show up and gather the information, ask for the opt-out, calmly get all that information together, and either that ask is enough to make change, or you've got the information to take to one of our organizations and say, help me with this. And then we can force these districts to do the right thing and respect parental rights.
I feel like that little clip from Kate really just summarizes what people can go learn from this hour and a half webinar. If they head to our YouTube channel, if they look in the show notes for this podcast episode, they can find the link. And again, anyone that is a parent or as a teacher needs to go watch this to see how they can opt out of all this LGBTQ nonsense. And Jonathan Keller, who is the president and CEO of California Family Council, he's on the webinar. He hosted, but we have 3 different attorneys on the webinar that are from 3 different organizations. We have Dean Broyles, who is the president of the National Center for Law and Policy on it. Kate Anderson, who you guys just heard speak. She is senior counsel at Alliance Defending Freedom. And as Greg said, she's the director of their Center for Parental Rights. And then we have Michael Peffer, who is senior counsel at the Pacific Justice Institute. So we wanted to bring to you guys attorneys from different law firms to come on, and they all have resources. There is opt-out resources. We have a phenomenal resource page where you guys can see things from each of these organizations. That's going to be linked in the show notes as well. And they come on, and the thing that I think is so important and that every parent and teacher listening around needs to know is if you turn in that opt-out form, and for some reason, the school district or the school administration is saying, oh, we can't take this. This isn't legal. This won't work. Whatever they do, the attorneys on the call make it clear that they are ready to help you out. That doesn't mean if your school district immediately says no, that all of a sudden you're going to be in a lawsuit, but that means those attorneys are willing to send in letters or work with the school district because legally, because of these Supreme Court wins, the school districts have to accept these opt-outs and they have to follow them. And I just think every parent needs to be opting their child out of this nonsense. And all these teachers need to stand up and say, no, I'm not going to do this PRISM training. I'm not going to be forced an ideology onto me that I'm supposed to then force onto children. But Greg, there is so much people can learn from this webinar, right?
Right. And I just want to go back to something Kate said. What she was talking about there is what happens if parents in a particular school opt out together. And it doesn't take that many parents, let's say 6-8% of one particular class or one particular school. If all the parents want to be opted out of a certain curriculum that parents are upset at, especially in an elementary school, those schools are going to be forced to find a different curriculum. Because, what are they going to do with 10% of the classes that, they have to put somewhere else? So what happens is it really puts parents in the driver's seat, right? And if there's a really offensive curriculum that, even 10-20% of parents don't want, you could really transform a school district's curriculum simply by opting your kids out. And so that's what we want to do. We want to encourage parents to do that. So get together with your other parents, fill out those forms, and get help from these legal organizations. You go to our website, and we actually have a resource page for parents under the Learning More tab. We'll provide the link also in the show notes here, but it shows you a copy of the video of the training you can watch for yourself and provides you links to all the opt-out forms for parents and teachers from these various legal organizations. So take advantage of that.
Yes. And something that I love that I've actually already heard from people that have watched the webinar, there were some questions on the webinar. At the end of the webinar, there's a whole Q&A section. There was amazing questions asked, amazing questions answered from the attorneys. But some people said, is it legal to send this webinar to the teachers at my school district or to my school board members? Yes, absolutely. And I've actually had some people reach out to us to already let us know that they're sharing this webinar with their school board members and saying, hey, you guys need to watch this because you need to be aware of what rights we have as parents. They're sending it to teachers that they know in their district to teach, maybe even their child's teacher, and saying, hey, just so you know, this is the rights that parents have, but also here's the rights that you have. And so I think that's so important to not just watch this as a parent, but send it to your school board members. Make sure your school board members are caught up on what rights you have. Send it to your school administration, send it to your school district. They need to be aware of the rights that parents and teachers have as well, because I think that will also help make the process smoother when you're submitting an opt-out form. If they've already heard from 3 attorneys that you have the right to do it, that might help with your process. So again, tune into that webinar, check it out. But before you head off of here to go check out the webinar, we want to walk through really interesting hearing at the state capitol. This was SB 934 by Senator Scott Wiener. It was heard on April 7th in the Senate Judiciary Committee. It unfortunately did pass through with 10 yes votes, 2 no votes, and then 1 no vote received. And so it's going to be heading off to the Senate Committee on Appropriations. But it was a pretty long hearing. We have the whole hearing on our YouTube channel that's available to watch. But Greg, this hearing was kind of sparked because of another Supreme Court case and another victory. And so before we dive into everything about the bill, let's watch this clip from Alliance Defending Freedom so everyone's caught up on this case.
Victory at the Supreme Court for free speech, families, and common sense. The U.S. Supreme Court just put a stop to Colorado's unconstitutional censorship against ADF client and licensed counselor Kaylee Childs. This landmark ruling allows her to affirm biological reality in conversations about gender and sexuality. The court ruled that the government cannot silence Kaylee from having voluntary conversations with clients under 18 who want to realign their identity with their sex and regain comfort with their body. This win helps protect counselors from similar laws in more than 20 other states and over 100 localities across the country, freeing them to help kids who are struggling and seeking their professional guidance. Roughly 90% of kids who struggle with their gender dysphoria before puberty grow to be comfortable with their bodies if they are not pushed towards harmful drugs and procedures. These kids deserve access to counseling that help them achieve that goal. They deserve real help affirming that their bodies are not a mistake. They deserve to know that they are wonderfully made. Now, children and families are free to pursue that care, and Kaylee is free to provide it. Thank you for supporting Kaylee and standing with us for truth.
Greg, can you kind of walk us through what was being talked about right there in that video?
Right. This is a case out of Colorado that has huge implications for us here in California, because in Colorado, they had a counseling ban on counselors who wanted to help kids, minors who have gender dysphoria, meaning they are uncomfortable with their bodies, they're talking about maybe being a different gender, or they have unwanted same-sex attraction. And this kind of counseling has been banned here in California. We were the first state to ban it back in 2012. Many states like Colorado also came forward and banned this kind of counseling, calling it harmful to anybody who had it. And really, you're simply letting these kids who want help to live according to their faith and not according to their feelings. That's what the Supreme Court said. It said that talk therapy, counselors have just as much freedom of speech rights in a counseling session on these topics as someone outside a counseling session. And so they decided for free speech, and which ended up making all the laws around the country that ban this kind of counseling illegal. So, of course, here in California, since we were the first to ban this type of counseling, LGBTQ leaders, as anticipated, reacted. And, one of the big leaders is Senator Scott Wiener from San Francisco. He goes around calling this type of counseling torture, right? Talking to people about change, words that they want to hear in a counseling session as torture. So this is a way of limiting free speech. Just what they do is anybody who's a licensed counselor, they say, hey, you're not just talking, you don't have free speech in a counseling session because your speech is actually conduct. And we can regulate conduct. And we'll just call your speech conduct. Well, the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that. And so this is great, but many states are now reacting. And that's what this hearing is about. Instead of banning this type of counseling, they're seeking to let people sue anybody doing any kinds of this change therapy to bankrupt any counselor who would attempt to help somebody live according to their faith and not according to their feelings. And so listen to what Scott Wiener's reaction to the decision. It's really outrageous.
The Supreme Court just legalized psychological torture of LGBTQ kids. Moments ago, the court struck down state bans on conversion therapy. I'm announcing new legislation to protect LGBTQ people in California from conversion therapy. My new legislation makes it easier for victims of conversion therapy to sue the people who inflict this on them. It'll also allow you to seek justice and damages for years or even decades after the therapy occurs. This bill sends a clear message that if you inflict this torture on LGBTQ people, you will be accountable. And to all the LGBTQ young people out there who are afraid right now because of this ruling and all of the hate being directed at you, just know you are loved by so many for exactly who you are. I and so many others will fight tooth and nail to protect you, and you will always have a safe place to call home in California.
Well, Greg, honestly, just hearing the amount of lies that continues to come out of Senator Scott Wiener's mouth just is so disturbing. It honestly boils my blood. And it's just so frustrating that he is okay with children struggling even when they want help. I mean, it just blows my mind the way he tries to angle and navigate these things.
Right. And this kind of fear-mongering, gaslighting has really had a huge effect on legislators. They don't want to be accused of psychologically torturing anybody. So, even pastors who normally would be eager to help kids are afraid because they get lumped in with, horror stories of kids being trapped in a room, and shamed and electrodes stuck to them and electrocuted to change their feelings. Some of that stuff has happened in the past. It doesn't happen anymore. Generally, what's happening now is people just want discipleship. They want to not live according to the flesh, but live according to the Spirit, which the Bible encourages us all to do. None of us are supposed to be living based on our internal desires, but based on our following God's law, right? That's what's going to make us the most happy and most fulfilled. And Christ transforms us, from one thing to another. And that's what the process of sanctification is. So that should be available to anyone. And somebody should be able to go to counseling and find and pursue happiness the way God said to pursue happiness, right? So we have a Supreme Court that says, yes, you can. But now the interesting thing is that, and you'll see it in this testimony in the hearing, is the LGB. You know what the LGBT means? Gay, bisexual, lesbian, transsexual. They've all kind of hung together, right? And queer, that's another label. They've all kind of hung together. But the LGB is now realizing that T isn't work with them. Because here's what's happening. Many folks who identify as lesbians, many folks who identify as gay, here's what's happening. The trans activists come and say, hey, person you identify as gay, you're not really a guy. You're actually a guy trapped in a woman's body. No, you're a woman trapped in a guy's body. And so let's transform your body to look like a woman. And they tell the same thing to the lesbians. Hey, you're not really a woman. You're actually a guy. You're just trapped in the wrong body. So let's give you drugs and surgeries to make you look. So there's this conflict now, and you will see that played out in the hearing. And Scott Wiener doesn't know what to do with it. Mm-hmm. So you watch what happens when you see the testimony.
Mm-hmm. And I think something to note too, Greg, is some of these people that identify as lesbian, the reason they're so against this whole trans movement is the lesbians recognize they don't want men in their bathrooms and in their locker rooms. I mean, we talked to a lot of them from San Francisco and the Northern California region that show up to the state capitol that oppose these crazy bills. And it's because they recognize that women are losing their safe spaces. And so that's a major push for them. But Greg, right before we go watch this testimony, the opposition testimony to SB 934, if SB 934 was signed into law, what would this bill really do?
Well, it's really a scare tactic. It would say anybody who attempts, a licensed counselor who attempts to help someone, it makes that type of help a big liability. Because what the bill does is says you can sue, somebody can sue you if you have any kind of emotional distress that they can attribute to this counseling. And not just like right after the counseling happens, but decades after the counseling happens. So someone 20 years after having the counseling can say, hey, you know what? I still feel stressed. I still feel depressed and hopeless. You know what causes this? It's that counseling I got, right? And they sue the counselor. Now the counselor's on the hook to defend themselves against something they said 20 years ago in a counseling session. It was words they heard, right? So it really, what it happens is no one is going to want to do any kind of counseling for fear their whole entire career would be ruined by a lawsuit. And no one wants to hire somebody to do that kind of counseling because it could destroy not just the counselor, but the counseling organization that might hire them. So, even though they would probably win in court, no one is going to try that counseling. So that's what this is about: chilling speech and making people afraid of being sued.
Perfect. I just want to note for all the listeners, if you're listening in the car with children or anything like that right now, maybe put this on pause and just tune in later, because there's just some things that are maybe talked about in this hearing that aren't child age appropriate. And so here's your chance. Put it on pause and then tune back in later. But now that you've had that warning, let's go ahead and watch that testimony.
Good afternoon. My name is Johnny Skinner. I'm here representing GenSpect. When I was young, I was a feminine child, and I discovered trans influencers online. They said, change your body and your life gets better, don't and it gets worse. Or as my doctors told my mom, I would commit suicide. The medical and mental health providers didn't bother to ask why I felt the way I did. They poisoned my body with blockers and hormones, arresting my puberty and messing with my development. The result, I'm a 23-year-old gay man who's never had an orgasm and may never experience one. Let that sink in. I was rendered anorgasmic because once you say you could be trans, that's it. Full stop. No exploration as to why is allowed, even if you are a struggling kid. The former president of WPATH, Dr. Marcy Bowers, a California surgeon who had performed the surgery for Jazz Jennings at 17, admitted on video that puberty blockers followed by cross-sex hormones results in no orgasms and stunted genitals. SB 934 guarantees that more people will end up like me, the walking but wounded. I could have been spared all of this if any of my therapists would have explored why I felt dysphoric, but they never did. They only led me to hate my body more. The Supreme Court just ruled in a rare bipartisan decision that laws like this are unconstitutional viewpoint discrimination. This bill is an attempted workaround that will be used to silence therapists who could have helped me avoid the irreversible harms to my body and the loss of my sexual function, as is the same for many others. So today I ask you to extend some empathy to survivors like me and vote no for this bill. Thank you.
All right.
Greg, sitting there and hearing his testimony, I do want to make one thing clear real quick. Just at California Family Council, obviously, we believe that marriage is between a man and a woman and things like that, but we still see that Johnny's sharing a powerful testimony about how the trans ideology has negatively affected his life. And there's a bunch of videos on social media where you can see Senator Scott Wiener. He's not sure what to do during this testimony. He's kind of spiraling, confused, stressed. And, as you watch the hearing play out, you actually see some of the Democrat legislators are actually starting to push back on Scott Wiener in this hearing. But kind of what disturbs me is we have had detransitioners testify at the state capitol for the past, I would say, 2 years. We've talked to them about the harm of trans ideology for the past 2 years. We're always having them come. And I would say 99% of times that the detransitioners, so if you don't know what that means, it's people that have tried to transition into the opposite sex and have recognized that you can't do that. It's more harmful and that they are beautiful the way they were born and made. And so they have then detransitioned. When they've testified at the state capitol, I would say 99% of the times, the legislators on the committee just ignore and disregard that they're even there. They normally don't ask questions. They normally don't even talk about that person. They just try to pretend like those 2 minutes didn't happen and then move on with the bill. And this one, Johnny, and this testimony really got them talking. There was a lot of asking Senator Scott Wiener, look at kind of questioning he's been harmed. We're not trying to harm children. He's been harmed, and which is so great. But I don't know about you, Greg. It really got me thinking, they were so concerned about his harm because he hasn't been able to have an orgasm. That's what they were stressed about. His like the way your body is supposed to react in like sexual intercourse is not working correctly. And that's like they've had people tell, like, they've had girls tell them, I have a double mastectomy, and if I have children one day now, I'm not going to be able to breastfeed them because of the trans ideology. They weren't concerned about that. And it shows that, I don't know, the concern goes back to the idea of sex and just how much that's caused harm, how much that's pushed, how much that's idolized at the state capitol. And I think just in culture. And it's really disturbing that it took that for them to be like, maybe this is harmful. I don't know. That's what my mind went to. And it's good that they're recognizing the harm, but someone really had to say that it was, they are not having orgasms. And that's what got the legislators finally concerned. I don't know. It's really disturbing to me.
It's disturbing all around. I mean, what accounts for people's blindness, willful blindness to harm done to kids? You know, I always thought, just the thought of trying to help a kid who's struggling with mental stress, cutting off their breasts, I thought that would be like the most horrific thing. You know, but we've been talking about that for several years now, bringing up, Lila Jane, and she got her breasts removed at 13, right? And I thought that's got to shock them out of this blind trusting in what they call gender affirming care. But no. So I don't know. I think seeing it also affect young kids who identify as gay, I think there's a ton of sympathy among women towards these young men who are been ridiculed and abused by, probably other guys. And they just feel so sympathetic towards them. And they just, want to love bomb them, right? But their love bomb is they always thought, well, this is supposed to help them. We're compassionate. And then to realize that, yeah, my love bomb is wrecking his body too, right? It's like, I don't know. I don't know what wakes people up. I pray people will open their eyes to see what terrible harm they're doing to people. I think it's starting to crack. I mean, one of the things I've been doing just recently, there's a brand new study out of Finland, not a conservative country by any means, but they did a long-term study of kids who had transitioned medically, meaning they took puberty blockers, they took cross-sex hormones, all to help them not feel anxious about themselves, to lower depression, to do better mentally. And they did a long-term study, and the results were terrible. Some of the rates for the guys who were trying to be women, they had 6% or 9% of them were, dealing with all kinds of mental health issues before transitioning. After, it was up to 60%. It's like, well, that's not getting better. And so what are we doing, right? I mean, psychological torture, maybe it's the actual surgeries and drugs that is making people absolutely worse. And you can imagine that to be true. I know that kids feel an initial euphoria. They think this is going to work. They look like they've always thought they were, but it wears off, right? And their bodies are fighting against the drugs they're taking, and they realize they're just pretending. And that's a really depressing thing when you find out you've done all this stuff to your body and you realize, yeah, I didn't change my sex. I just morphed myself to look like the opposite sex, right? So it's a tragedy. But folks, the more we stand up, the more we speak up, things are starting to move. But folks, everybody's got to do it. Everybody's got to stand up. Stop using preferred pronouns. Stop thinking you're loving someone by telling them exactly what they want. You show your compassion by caring for people, loving on them. But in the end, you got to tell them the truth. That's the most loving thing you can do.
Absolutely. And I think what's so interesting is actually during this hearing, Greg, at one point, Senator Scott Wiener, the author of the bill, literally said, we do not know if our law will end up being enforceable or not. And I think that really goes to show how a lot of these legislators work. They introduce laws all the time that are unconstitutional or a violation of the First Amendment right, and they just don't care. They're going to introduce them because they know they have the supermajority. They're going to pass them through, and they're going to just try to enforce them until a lawsuit hits. And so it's just so interesting to see how they do that, how there's really no accountability when they're passing these laws. I mean, this was in the Senate Judiciary Committee. This is when legal things are talked through. That's what that committee is for. And for him to be like, we don't, I'm passing this bill. I want you guys to all vote on it. I'm working hard, but we don't know if it's going to be enforceable or not. It's just so interesting. But like I said, this bill did pass through the Senate Judiciary Committee. It's heading to the Committee on Appropriations on the Senate side. If it passes through appropriations, which more so just looks at the financial angle of things, it's going to hit this whole Senate floor. So that means every single one of you needs to call your state senator and needs to tell them, hey, we want you to vote no on SB 934, and make sure you let them know that you are a constituent, that you live in their district, because your voice matters. And so CFC will be pumping out information on when to call, who to call. We'll give you talking points and everything like that. And so we want to make it as easy as possible for you to use your voice to oppose the evil that is being pushed at the state capitol. And so in order to know how to access that, how to stay up to date, make sure you head to californiafamily.org and sign up for our weekly newsletter. The link to that will be in the show notes, as well as follow us on Instagram and Facebook or X, and you will see what is happening, who to call, and what is going on. But Greg, do you have any other thoughts on SB 934 or anything else?
Nope. We will just to let you know that what's happening here in California is also happening in Colorado and several other states. This is a nationwide strategy that is bound to fail, but they're all pushing it anyway. So, but the only reason things like this fail is that people got to stand up and demand that the Constitution be followed. That's what we're doing. That's what we encourage you to do. And that part of that is making sure your legislators know where you are, where you stand on these issues. So make sure you call them.
Absolutely. And I would recommend tuning into the whole hearing of SB 934. If you want to see what a real committee hearing looks like at the state capitol, when all the different legislators are talking and asking each other questions and all the things, this is the perfect hearing to tune into. So look at the show notes to get the whole video for that. We will see you guys next time on the podcast, and hopefully we'll see you in person on Thursday, May 7th at the California State Capitol on the West Steps at 11 a.m. Thursday, May 7th is the National Day of Prayer, and so we're heading to the state capitol. We'll be there on the steps with pastors and just leaders from across the state. We're going to be praying over the state of California, praying over our nation, praying for our legislators, praying for our governor, praying for these issues that we're fighting. And so it is going to be an hour of just prayer and worship. And how cool that we live in a nation that we can go to our state capitol grounds and surrender our state to Jesus and just lay it down and pray. And so that's Thursday, May 7th. Head to californiafamily.org, click the event page link. You'll get all the information on that. Check out the show notes. All the links that we talked about are there. And with that, we'll see you guys next time.